I'm here with Felipe Arango, and he works with Business Sustainable Development, a consulting firm that works with all sorts of sustainable initiatives around the world. So I'm going to start with the first question I ask here is what is your earliest memory of money?
My earliest memory of money, I think it's related to Christmas and to gifts, perhaps.
All right.
I think my grandmother always snuck a
Gave
little
money.
bit of money on the side so that
Okay.
we could buy what we wanted to buy.
We had some adopted grandparents that we would go see, and the man was always, sneaking. It was coins, but he would find ways to sneak them to us. Anyway,
that
so
was
we
my
always loved
grandmother.
going to see him. Yeah. And you grew up in Colombia, is that right?
Yes, born and raised in Bogota.
Okay. And what sort of situation did you grow up in?
It was a very, it's a very, I guess, schizophrenic world to grow up with. You grow up very, very close to. I was privileged to grow close to affluence, but the levels of inequality and conflict and violence were always very, very apparent.
If I remember Bogota, right, the wealthier people was down in the city center, and then as you go up the hills, it was poor people living.
Yeah, it's one of the most unequal countries in the world, and one of the most marginalized urban settings, and just exclusion and conflict.
And how did you notice that when you were growing up?
I was very fortunate to go to a I guess it was a Catholic school run by Benedictine priests that went to Colombia precisely to serve.
Right.
And in the philosophy of the school, social justice and engagement
Catholic social teaching.
Yes, and engagement in social initiatives as a student was very present. So I guess that.
And how did that affect you as you saw the inequalities around you?
I guess in two ways, and also family upbringing in terms of the types of projects and initiatives my dad was moving forward. But I guess it helped with two things. That the first one is to raise the awareness around the injustice and to raise the awareness around the inequality, but also to see that they were people and influencers and change makers from the Catholic or from the professional that had set out their lives to change that, and that was it has remained as a great example.
Okay. And your father was involved in branding?
He's been involved in communications and advertising, but he was also always very much engaged in working with politicians. One of the leading politicians in the country in terms of helping him transform the country. He was also very much engaged with Gabriel Garcia Marquez, our Nobel Prize winner.
Yeah, right. One of my favorite authors.
Yes, he did his portraits, but also was very much engaged with the social causes from the communications and marketing perspective.
Yeah, that's great. And so after going to school in Bogota, you went to university. Where was that?
I went when I was 17 years old. I went to Boston to study political science and business administration in BU.
Wow, that's quite a change.
Yes. My brother was there, so it was a little bit easier. My older brother.
And you knew English already?
Yes, this was an American Benedictine priest, so the high school was actually primary school was in English. So yes.
And what did you learn from BU then?
Political science was a really interesting. I think it was a really interesting formation. You get a little bit of political philosophy, and those that have tried to explain how the world could be from a philosophical perspective, and also some bit of economics and of course how we can organize politically as a society to aspire to be a better society. And because I was mixing it with business, I didn't really know at that time that was what I was going to be ending doing as a career, which is mixing business and social development. But it was the early days of CSR, the early days of corporate social responsibility and sustainable management. This was 2000.
Back when we all thought it might be easy to do, right?
Yes, exactly. But it was nice to get those two perspectives, but also a very international university.
Right,
It was really
right.
nice to have a chance to work in teams with people from all over the world.
Yeah,
and
that's great.
To see
That's
different
great.
perspectives.
So after you finished university, what was the next step for you?
I went to Wall Street.
Really?
Not that there's anything wrong with that,
Right,
but
right.
I went to work at that time. Chase Manhattan was merging with JP Morgan,
Yep,
so
yep.
I went to New York to work as an investment banking analyst.
Oh, wow.
And I was very much in charge with analyzing their financial, providing
Right.
analysis for Latin America.
Okay.
And at
Okay.
that time, very excited about the biggest investment bank and the
Right.
change that finances
Right,
could make
right,
in the Latin
exactly.
American society. But to be frank, Larry, at that time, there weren't principles for responsible investment
Oh, right. Right.
or financial inclusion, or those topics were not part of the agenda. And I left frustrated and a bit disappointed.
So what was it about Wall Street that you felt didn't fit who you were or what you wanted to do?
I mean, of course, there's the most apparent thing. It's more at a personal level, and it's the development of corporate cultures that wouldn't value humanity in
Right.
some respects.
Right.
Just having to be there until working 20 hours a day and
Right.
and having to. It was just not very. There was not a lot of respect for creativity,
Oh,
for
right.
well-being.
Right.
And that shocked me initially.
Yeah.
How can the most influential institutions not respect it? So that was a factor, but also the fact that in many respects the research and the investment decisions were very short-sighted and very
Oh, right.
and with a very limited scope of analysis,
Yeah.
where the only information that was being taken into account was the generation of financial value.
Right.
In the short term.
Can we exit and make money?
Yes, yes. And I don't want to. JP Morgan has come a long way in
Right,
many
right.
respects, and so has the financial industry. And it's just great to see now all the asset managers and investment banks that are going into impact investing and
Right,
into
right.
integrated social and environmental value into their decisions. But at the beginning of the
Yeah.
millennium, that was
But
not the case.
This seems to be a theme for you in your life, though, is this trying to bring everything together, that, we're people with many different values, and we have to find a way to express those in our politics and in our business activities, that it's, business isn't just for money.
Yes.
Business is a tool that helps people get jobs, it helps people create things, but it's more than just the money that comes out of it that's important.
Definitely, and I would take it even a step further in terms of capitalism as a system where we can't have an either-or world,
Right.
where we have an economic system and a financial system,
Right.
and then we have the development world.
Right.
That they could come together, and
Right.
that capitalism could be a force for good, that business can be a force for good, that technology can be a force for good.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can live in an and world,
Right.
where all those can exist and inequality
Yeah.
disappear.
So after Wall Street, what was next?
I left a little bit frustrated, young at the time, and I went direct to Colombia to work in a civil society organization.
Yeah.
Actually, it had been formed in honor of the politician that my
Oh,
dad had helped for many
yeah.
years. He was murdered by Pablo Escobar in 1989. Luis Carlos Galan, one of the
Yeah.
most influential figures in my life, and he had set up an institute for the strengthening of democracy, or an institute was set up in
Right.
his legacy. And I once I started working there, very an NGO, a civil society organization, very deep into the Colombian grassroots movements. And I told the director I really want to work in rural areas. Growing up, I always wanted to explore the rural areas of Colombia. And
Those were battle zones back then.
yes, it was some of the toughest years of the conflict.
Right.
Of the armed conflict in Colombia, but it was precisely going to conflict-stricken areas where rural farmers were dedicated to growing coca and poppy for heroin
Right,
and
right.
cocaine production, and helping them strengthen their rural organizations so that they could find alternative
Yeah.
livelihood initiatives. And since that day, it clicked, and
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to do something related to that.
Okay. And how did that lead into the work that you're doing now with BSD?
Yes, it was. It was still very development agency focused at that time, and we were
right.
trying to set up producer associations and farmer cooperatives.
Right.
But-
And you sort of saw the need for sustainable work there.
Exactly, especially access to market.
Right,
I had
right.
never heard of fair trade, for example, as an initiative. We were trying to find markets for them, but we really didn't even
where they could get some value added and not the lowest price.
Definitely, and also how can they engage with corporate value chains, or how could they have access to pre-financing? But these were terms that weren't there: sustainable supply chains,
Right.
Financial inclusion, microfinance.
Yeah.
They were not part of the possibilities there. And then I went to Brazil after my girlfriend. Actually, she's now my wife. She had stayed in Boston, and when I went to Brazil, I had the fortune to meet one of the founders of my current company, my partner, and they had set up a company called Business Meets Social Development at that time. And they were pioneers in fair trade and pioneers with the Global Reporting Initiative around corporate sustainability, and pioneers around. They were setting up actually sustainable value chains in Brazil for soy and banana, small farmers. And when I saw that merging of those worlds existed, we started working together.
So for Colombian, you were willing to even drink the Brazilian coffee in order to learn these things, right?
Yes. I drank the Brazilian coffee. It's Robusta, or Colombia has very good Arabica, but yes.
All right.
Well, and I married a Brazilian, so I had to drink the Brazilian coffee.
So explain to me what your company does, how it helps these local movements or farmers or other groups like that.
We early on in the philosophy of the company, social norms played a very big role, and it's the understanding that yes, the corporate world has to behave well, and the financial institutions have to do things right, but that society also has the responsibility to create the norms by which these institutions were held accountable. Precisely. Yeah. Actually, there was another standard, the accountability standard at that time, the AA 1000.
Yeah.
But the two founders of the organization where I work were pioneers in that as well. So we started working with the standard setters and with the social norms. Early days of fair trade, there wasn't any certification system. We were all some of the first fair trade auditors.
Wow.
And really help set up the social norm that fair trade has turned out to be, but also for the Global Reporting Initiative in terms of providing transparency for organizations as to how they are managing their impacts on society. So that has been a very strong line of work in what we do, and it's helping standard setters and social norms take place. But then we started being very active in developing sustainability strategies for corporations, sustainable supply chain for corporations, stakeholder engagement for brands.
So looking at more of the environmental issues and
across the board, we had a very strong social.
So also looking at employees and then suppliers and
definitely. Especially sustainable supply chains on the social side, but working conditions and employee well-being, and we gradually layered on top the environmental aspects. And today we support corporations and brands across the board in defining their sustainability strategies on the social, economic, and environmental sides. We're calling it capitals now, on the human capital, financial capital, environmental, natural capital. But we never stop working with development agencies, and we still do. We also get very much engaged on the ground with development agencies.
And so just to get an idea of the scope, what are some of the social brands or the trust marks that you've worked with? And so you talk about fair trade.
Fair trade was one of the first ones, and it's still very close to our heart, and we're still doing some work with them. And this was the first social norm that allowed consumers to be
able to
active.
see, right.
Yes, to be able to see.
Make
but
a
also-
choice when you bought.
Exactly, to see consumption as an act of citizenship.
Yeah.
And that through a very simple
Right.
act of consumption, you could connect to,
Right.
especially to organizational
And
strength.
you could influence markets with it.
Exactly, and at that time I remember coming to Europe at that time, or going to Switzerland or to France and saying, "Oh, look at the label in
Right,
one
right.
coffee."
Right.
I would go into the supermarkets to look
Yeah.
for the label, and it's amazing to see what are we, almost 20 years later that it has 95% of recognition, and
Right.
that this is a concept that has stuck. The Global Reporting Initiative, as a standard setter for corporate disclosure and for organizational disclosure, we've worked with them from the start, helping develop different initiatives. We work with accountability, and this is
Right.
the AA 1000 standard to make sure that organizations have good stakeholder engagement and are responsive to the concerns and the expectations of society. And now with the SMART campaign,
Right.
for some time helping the SMART campaign advance what client protection
Right.
means for financial services, and I'm very excited to see that has also gained some traction. And the most exciting one perhaps that we're working with right now, because it's new, and it's a social norm for cities.
Huh.
And this is the Certified Welcoming program that is
Wow.
being run by
Wow.
Welcoming America.
Yeah.
And it's a network of counties and cities in the US that have decided to create the welcoming infrastructure for refugees and for migrants.
Wow. Wow.
So we already have 3 certified, or Welcoming America has certified 3 cities.
Wow.
And it's very much, it's one of the first certifications for the management systems of cities,
Right.
in terms of how they're creating economic integration of the foreign-born, and how they're creating access to educational
Right.
opportunities and
Oh, that's great.
safe communities.
Right.
And that is now evolving with the leadership of David Lubell to Welcoming International. Welcoming Australia, welcoming
good.
New Zealand,
Good.
welcoming
Yeah.
Germany.
Right.
So that, and it's interesting, a social norm, but for the way that cities
Right.
should be run.
But it's interesting. The concept is sort of taking a value that people have and that many people share, but turning it into a process that people can follow. And then you talk about the accountability system. There's a reporting mechanism, or a way of seeing whether or not this value has been lived out in the way, in the products that you're buying, or in the way you're carrying out activities. As an organization or a city or a company, it's a way of translating what we care about into economic decisions.
Yes, indeed. And it goes, there's a linkage at the value level, and connecting with consumers or investors,
Right.
or citizens, so that their choices can be aligned to their values. But
Right.
these social norms also, I think, go a step deeper, and it's on how we turn those principles into reality.
Right.
What are the management systems that that a financial institution needs to have in place to protect clients, or
Right.
what are the fair pricing and fair trading criteria, and the need for democracy, participation, and transparency in the rural farmer
Right.
organizations.
Right.
How is that managed? So it's going
Right.
also from principle to
Right,
practice.
which is the tricky part. I mean, people share principles a lot, but then rarely take the time to measure whether or not their activity actually is meeting the principle. I mean, I remember when we were starting the SMART campaign, a lot of organizations had ethical codes that they wanted to follow, but very few of them had any process for checking to see whether or not those codes were being followed by their staff or by their policies or any of that. So this system of, okay, here's what you believe in, now how would we observe that happening? And then how can we teach people to come in and assess whether or not you're actually doing what you say you want to do?
Exactly. There's a very, it's common to see value statements hanging on
It's
the
pretty
walls,
easy to
and
do.
very attractive code of conduct and
Right.
ethical
Right.
aspects. But I think you've touched, you've hit a very important nail on the head, and it is the plan, do, check, act cycle. That this was very much
Right.
sparked by the quality movement, and
Yeah,
Deming's
yeah.
thinking
Yeah.
about how, I'm committed to quality, but how do I check if I have quality, and then how do I act if I
Right.
don't have quality? And
Right.
that transformed organizations across the world. So that checking
So
on
you use
yourself.
that same process
Yes.
to look at values and principles.
So
right.
this is what you aspire to, but
Right.
what are you planning? What are you doing? How are you checking?
Right.
But most importantly, how are you acting?
And now you're creating tools that I as a consumer can use as well, so that when I'm making my choices, you give me a way of observing whether or not what I'm buying actually promotes the values that I say I believe in.
Definitely, and we have been more engaged with the technical support to the multi-stakeholder standard setters.
Right.
But the ones that are driving those tools and those standards and those certification systems I think it's very interesting because they're transnational multi-stakeholder
Right.
organizations
Yeah,
that
so it's
transcend beyond
complex
nations and transcend beyond
Right.
legislation.
Right.
And
But it's shared values. It's people who care about the same thing and want to find a way of expressing that.
yes, and that have collectively figured out a way for a global standards and aspirations as to
Right.
how the world should be. In
Right.
some respect, the philanthropy world and
Right.
the public sector or even the private sector have not been able to solve some of the most
Right.
concerning issues
Right.
of our society. So can we come together
Right.
as stakeholders to define standards and
And it's one thing I've worked with Muhammad Yunus before, and he talks about social businesses, but it's sort of the same principle is that the way he says it is human beings, we care about many more things than money. We do care about money, but we also care about values, and we care about seeing a world in a certain way. But somehow we assign to business just the work of dealing with money, and then it's nonprofits that deal with everything else. But what we end up with is sort of non-sustainable ways of dealing with problems and sustainable ways of dealing with making money. And what you're doing is trying to bring them together so that you have sustainable solutions that actually address the cares we have as human beings.